Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Mailen Salucio. I am responsible for the International Agri-food program. Thank you for joining us as part of one of the first discussions of the open source Código Abierto Congress. For the second consecutive year, we have the honor of having the outstanding participation of IICA, the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation for Agriculture, which is undoubtedly an ally in ABRASID's international footprint, and it has collaborated with the organization of discussions with an international focus. So this panel opens up the space with the collaboration of IICA. This panel is called Building a New Narrative, the Future of Agriculture and Agri-Food Systems of the Americas. So this is an invitation to reflect on the general vision or the mainstream vision that exists nowadays on agriculture and food systems. And it also is an invitation to reflect on whether it is necessary to build a new narrative that may be better connected with our region's reality. In fact, last year in 2024, IICA brought together a group of specialists so as to discuss this question. To what extent the current narrative, which describes agriculture and the agri-food systems of the Americas, is consistent, or to what extent can it be used to face up to the challenges that the region is faced with, both current and future. So as part of this discussion between these experts, the answer was quite concrete. We need a new narrative to describe not just who or what we are today, but also what the future of agriculture in the region will look like. So this is our proposal for this panel with these outstanding speakers. They are all international speakers. And as a matter of fact, we suggest reflecting on the pillars of this transformative narrative. We invite you to reflect on the importance of communicating the strategic role that farming has and how farming needs to be properly aligned with policies, investments, and practices. And we need to think as well on how we can lead the region towards a more sustainable and a more just future. So we have Manuel Otero. He is the General Director of IICA since 2017. Under his leadership, IICA has played an outstanding role in the defense and promotion of agriculture and agri-food systems in the Americas internationally. We also have Jack Bobo. He is a global expert. He has over 20 years of experience on agri-food systems and farming technology, farming policies, consumption trends, also mainstreaming science. Currently, he is the executive director of the UCLA Rothman Family Institute for Food Studies. We also have Kip Tom. He is a world leader on agri-food, and he belongs to a family with 8 generations of farmers, and he is the VP on agricultural policies in the American Fest Policy Institute. Also have Walter Beithane. He also has worked for many years in the design and execution of several multidisciplinary programs, both national and international. He has worked profusely on R&D, and he nowadays works as special research scientist at the University of Columbia in New York. And we are also joined by Marcelo Torres. He is the president of ABRASID, and he's the director of the Ceres Tolvas group. Okay, so after this brief intro, and in order to kickstart the presentations by our panelists, I will invite Manuel, who is going to provide an introduction on IICA's invitation having to do with rethinking about the agriculture of the region as a strategy to face up to the challenges that we are being faced with. So as I'm walking towards the podium, I would like to say good morning to all of you guys. I was told that I had to speak from this place, so I would like to thank the organizers, Marcelo, Mailen. Thank you for joining me in this strategic leadership that we continue to build. So it's an honor to be here with you today, and it's amazing to be joined by this top-level panel with Walter, with Marcelo, etc. So I would like to talk about the new narrative, and I'm doing this from the standpoint of the fact that I'm convinced that agriculture in the Americas may be lacking in self-esteem. And it would we sometimes get the impression that we do not always trust ourselves. And the media, in general, only published bad news. Remember the drought that happened in 2022, 2023, which really hit Argentina. Of course, there was a significant economic impact because of the drought, but it's only rarely that we see an article or a piece of news where we see the miracle of food production. To produce food for a whole year, it is necessary to feed our generation, to our population. We need to have 30 million tons of food. This is for Argentina's population. So that requires using our soil inputs, natural resources, water resources. Of course, it requires the work of the farmers, the institutions, technology. It requires transportation, logistics. So this is something that is highly sophisticated. People sometimes get the impression that the food is right there in the supermarket shelves and that people can go ahead and help themselves with it. But it looks like a miracle, but it's not. Society does not seem to understand that there's a lot of work behind that. And on the other hand, there are people that frown on agriculture, that see agriculture as an extraction-based industry that does not respect natural resources. I think that we need to change our struggle. If we are dealing with farming that is taking a look at the new frontier of knowledge, the 21st century 5.0 or 4.0 agriculture, we cannot remain stuck in the past. We cannot remain in the 20th century. We have to move forward. I am going to present the first slide right here. At IICA, we affirm that farming in the Americas from a production standpoint implies 1 out of 3 tons of food that is produced in the world, and 1 out of 4 tons that are exported from our continent into the other countries, in international trade. And with regard to resources, we account for almost 50% of the plant's biodiversity and 33% of fresh water worldwide. So we are the stewards of food safety and environmental sustainability in the planet. This trend will become more intense as time goes by, and that is why we are called on becoming more of leaders. We are called upon to highlight our leadership. So we need to take our reality over to international fora. Of course, my country, Argentina, plays a key role. It is one of the 10 worldwide exporters, and above all, in Mercosur, where I admit there's this huge force, which is Brazil, but there's also Paraguay, Uruguay, and other countries. In this case, Argentina is a fundamental player. That is why I insist so much that we need to improve our self-esteem. We need to be more assertive and say to the world who we really are and what our responsibility is with regard to food safety. Saying this does not imply that we do not have space for improvement. Of course we do. First of all, we need to have a very strong system to understand the nature and the implications of geopolitical changes going on in the world right now. We need to be worried about this, of course, but the changes in the worldwide stage have happened in the past and they will continue to happen. So what we need to do is we need to be patient, and we need to know that the placement of our products is not something passive that happens just because, but rather we need to have a more proactive involvement so as to strengthen our role in the world stage. There are growing demands, of course, in terms of quality, food safety, environment, traceability. And traceability, as I was saying, is not just one option. It has to be a key factor so that we may continue to be strong players in the international stage. Growth in demand is something that is very well known. Everyone knows that there's going to be a 50% increase by 2050 with regard to demand, and that is why I was saying that we are called upon to strengthen our role as the main region in the world that provides food to the planet. Pests and diseases, that's another issue that is not something specific to the new narrative, but the Américas, we have a minister from Panama, the diarrhea is back. There's also avian influenza as well as other diseases. So we need to be careful about the return of a series of pests and diseases. And for that we have to have significant vet services. Extreme weather events, that's another issue that should really merit our attention. But this is what I wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to talk to you about the transition from the old narrative towards the new narrative. And the first thing we need to do is we need to ask ourselves, where are we still caught in the old narrative? I can explain this in a twofold way. It's a complex issue anyway. But first of all, our region, and Argentina is a classic example, has become highly urbanized. Problems have become urbanized. Poverty has become urbanized. Same thing for hunger. So in the rural areas, there's just 20% of the population of our country that is left. And clearly enough, the constituencies are more important in the cities, so that is quite complex. And what rural areas require is that they need to build bridges vis-a-vis these urban sectors.
From a historical point of view, related to the previous point, I wanted to emphasize that back in the 60s, when we talked about the import substitution model and the need for the farming sector to provide cheap input for the industrial wages, relegated agriculture to a secondary role. And this is pretty harmful. And evidently, this has made us trapped in an old narrative. How do we build a new narrative? Well, we should define a set of marketing or communicational messages, extend our communication capacity with our stakeholders, not only from the farming sector, but also the need to understand that agriculture is part of an integrated system where we have to contribute to health, energy, agriculture as part of the solution. That is part of one of the slogans IICA tries to promote, understanding that there's not just a single agriculture. One thing is the Mercosur agriculture, another thing is the export agriculture of the Pacific coast, the Latin agriculture, the agriculture of the Caribbean. Today we have with us the minister from Trinidad and Tobago and the other countries. They are very completely different models. That heterogeneity gives our regional agriculture the options we can offer and things we have to correct. Understanding the heterogeneity of actors and the science innovation as drivers towards that innovation. There is a new frontier. The frontier moves, borders are moving day to day. And, for example, gene addition and improvement, precision agriculture, nanotechnology, AI, etc., is a frontier that starts pushing forward. And this should be a challenge so as to be able to transform many of these opportunities into a promotion and a moving forward of our productivity, and not to become a nightmare. If we do not take action, this frontier can be pushed away more and more. So we need to narrow the gap between the available knowledge and the applied knowledge. Of course, Argentina has a great productive potential here. There's a comparison for corn, soybean, and wheat, and the main yields, and also in terms of commodity differentiation. I know I have 15 minutes, so I will rush. And I want to point out that we see the increase of examples of transforming experiences and transformative experiences of the Americas connected to digital agriculture, AI, the use of sensors, where we need more and more agro entrepreneurs that are going to be the key actors, the key players to move this transformation forward. These should become an interconnected archipelago of options to move forward as fast as possible in this transformative process. The IICA has systematized all these advances, and I'm sure in the week of digital agriculture, on the third week of September, many of these cases and stakeholders will be present. Of course, we need to build bridges. In my opinion, we are going to see public-private partnerships. The private sector has an increasing importance. We need more investment in research and development, strategies to strengthen investment and funding, strengthen technical capabilities and digital capabilities, modernize extension services, provide support for the incubation and scaling of projects, and a new regulatory framework and public policies based on evidence to be able to follow it up. IICA has an observatory of policies where we put an emphasis on the follow-up of policies. I insist, this private sector, according to the World Bank, the private sector accounts for 70% of the global investment in agricultural innovation. It provides technological solutions. And this meeting, a pre-seed meeting, is a clear example with such young players, such young stakeholders from the private sector. It is key for the scaling of innovation and is strategic to offer an opportunity for growth and inclusion. This quote is constantly repeated by Dr. Jack Bobo, and I quote, "The future depends on us." It's not the future that the others will tell us what will happen or what we have to do. We need to be protagonists of agricultural transformation in the Americas, and we should know that there is an acceleration process and acknowledge that the next 25 years will be decisive due to all the changes that to come. And as Professor Bobo says, is going to be more important than the previous 10,000 years of agriculture. So it depends on us. We have to accelerate the transition from the old to the new narrative and believe in what we are representing. We need a new generation of public policies with more protagonism from the private sector, and a new generation of leaders to move forward in all the different fronts. And I'll wrap up here. I thank, as a General Director of the IICA, and I invite you to please listen to the rest of the panelists who know much more than I do and who is going to honor these days with their presence. Thank you very much, Manuel, for your presentation, for the introduction on this topic. Now, this invitation or this reflection on the new narrative in agriculture, as Manuel mentioned, it makes us think of the relevance and the importance of communication as a strategic tool, and also how we relate, how we connect with the different audiences when it comes to science and agriculture, topics that are difficult to convey. And we have now one of the most influential voices here when it comes to thinking of the future of agriculture for the region, the trends that define the future of agriculture. So I invite Jack to share his presentation, not only about what he's seeing in terms of the future of agriculture, but also on the relevance, on the importance of the communication of science and how we relate to the different audiences and what are the messages we want to convey and so as to reach the audience.
So we need a new narrative for agriculture because the future of agriculture will look very different than the history of agriculture. Everything will change. For 10,000 years, farmers were asked to do one thing, produce more food. But we exist at that unique moment in all of human history when you're not only being asked to produce more food, but better food. Food that's better for people and better for the planet. And in order to do this, we need a new narrative, because the best stories bring us together to solve big problems. Unfortunately, today, the narrative about agriculture is dividing us. It's making everything harder. It's a story of a broken food system. So what does that look like? Well, if we were to talk about land, 40% of all the land on Earth that could be used for agriculture is being used for agriculture today. The amount of cropland is the size of South America. The amount of pasture land is the size of Africa. So in terms of land, there is nothing more important than agriculture. If we were to talk about water, 70% of all fresh water goes to agriculture. This is the Colorado River, the 5th largest river in America, no longer flows to the sea. These are not the challenges of 2050. These are the realities of today. If we were to talk about climate change, 10 or 15% of greenhouse gases come from agriculture. Another 10 or 15% come from deforestation, 80% of which is caused by agriculture. That's almost as much as energy and more than anything else. If that wasn't enough of a challenge, we're also going from 8 billion people to 9.5 billion people by 2050. Everything will get harder. And according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, we need between 25% and 75% more food by 2050. And again, an enormous challenge. Everything will get harder. And unfortunately, we're not even feeding the people today. Nearly 800 million people will go to bed hungry today. About 9 million people die every year of hunger-related illnesses. For most people, this is just a statistic. They can't wrap their minds around that challenge. So let me put it in perspective. That's 25,000 people today will die of hunger-related illnesses. That's 1,000 people over the next hour. That's one person every 4 seconds. Many of them children. There's not a single person who wouldn't go help that hungry child if they saw them. But too often we don't see those who are in need. And so people don't appreciate how important the work you're doing is. How do we help them to understand? So what do all of these problems have in common? Well, for many people, what they have in common is that agriculture is the problem that must be solved. That's the current narrative. But they also have something else in common. And what they have in common is that these problems can only be solved through collaboration. They can only be solved if we work together. And yet, collaboration has never been harder. According to the World Economic Forum, misinformation is the #1 threat to society, and polarization is the #4 threat to society, which of course is driving that misinformation. So if we can't solve big problems without working together, and we can't work together, how do we change that? We change it by having a new narrative. Unfortunately, that's a challenge because we have competing views of what the future of agriculture should look like. On one hand, we have a slow food movement that says we should be producing food the way we did 100 years ago. And we have a slightly more high-tech version of what the future of food should look like that says we should go faster, faster, faster. And for many people, these trends are moving in opposite directions. How do we bring them all together? Well, innovation is going to be key to delivering that better future. Unfortunately, people love innovation almost as much as they despise change. And there is no place that people despise change more than in the food they eat. Because food is what brings us together with friends. It brings us together with family. And if you mess with my food, you're messing with my family, and people don't like that. But if we don't change how we produce food, everything will change. How do we get people as excited by the latest food innovation and agricultural technology as they are with the latest smartphone? How do we change the narrative? Because it's important, because science tells us what we can do, but the public tells us what we should do. It doesn't matter if we have innovation that can solve problems if we don't get to use it. How do we make people excited and demand agricultural innovation? According to the old narrative, science is the problem to be solved. How do we change that? Part of the problem is how we talk about it. We like to talk about problems and solutions. And when we talk about the problems, we can scare people. And then we talk about solutions and they don't believe us. And so we leave them more concerned than they were before we started. So we need to find a new way of communicating. So what's missing from the current narrative? I would argue that what's missing is historic context. People don't understand the history of agriculture, so they don't understand the future of agriculture. We need them to understand the role of innovation in the past so they can appreciate the role of innovation in the future. So let me give you some examples. I spent the last 2 years in the UK, so I'll use that as an example. CO2 emissions in the UK, 5.5 tons per person. You may not know, but it's a terrible number. It's higher than the global average. When young people hear these numbers, they're concerned about their future. They think their future will be worse than their parents' future. But you know what? It's also a 150-year low. By providing that historic context, that something that seems terrible can be inspiring. If you can reduce emissions that much, that fast, maybe we can do better. So how do we get people excited? Well, again, Today we're asking people to sacrifice for the future. But CO2 emissions are 40% lower today than they were in 1990, and GDP in the UK is 40% higher. We can have a better future and a more sustainable future at the same time. We need to stop asking people to sacrifice for the future, and we need to invite them to embrace the future. We need to offer a future that is exciting and hopeful and optimistic, and we can bring them along. So what about agriculture? Well, I mentioned 800 million people going to bed hungry. That's totally unacceptable in this world today. But 30 years ago, 20% of all the people on the planet would have been going to bed hungry. 60 years ago, 30% of all the people on the planet would have been going to bed hungry. So 10% is unacceptable, but it's wildly better than where we came from. And where we're going is the right direction. Childhood mortality, the lowest point in all of human history, by a long shot. And that's because of better health and nutrition. Agricultural production, you know these numbers well. Wildly better than where we were in 1960 on more or less the same amount of land. We need that historic context. Today there are about 3.5 billion hectares of forest on the planet. If we were farming today with 1960s technology, we would need 1 billion additional hectares of land. So it's easy to go out and see a forest that's been cut down and replaced with a field of soybeans. It's very hard to walk into a forest and say, this forest only exists because of agricultural innovation. We need to help people understand what agriculture has protected, what it has delivered. So I want to give you another example in terms of how things have changed from 1800 to today. Life expectancy is dramatically higher in Argentina, in the United States, in Kenya, in France, in China, in every country of the world. Things are not just better, they are wildly better, and this is a story of agriculture. This is a story about better health and nutrition that most people just don't understand. The average person today is wildly better than the best person of 1800. We should celebrate that. So one of the thoughts I want to leave you with is, things are not bad and getting worse. They are good and getting better, but not fast enough. That's the story we should be telling. How do we do better faster? That is an invitation to work together to solve big problems. How can I work with you, the farmer, to do better faster? We need a new narrative. We also need to think about the future in a different way. So for most people, when they think about the future, they ask two questions. What do I think will happen, and what should I do about it? And that's a natural way to act. That's how companies think about the future. It's how people think about the future. It's how governments think about the future. This is really strategic planning. But it also has its limitations. Strategic planning is about preparing for the place that you expect to go. And the future we expect is not the future that we want. The future that we want is even better than that. So instead, we need to be using strategic foresight. I spent a few years working as a food futurist. A future is a title you give yourself so you can charge more as a consultant. So to all the young people in the room, I encourage you to take on the title of futurist. But we think of the future differently. We often use this futures cone. And in the middle of the cone is the probable future. It's the most likely future. And strategic planning is about preparing for that likely future. But there's also a plausible future that could happen and a possible future that is unlikely but is also could happen. But our best future is not the probable future. our best future is someplace else. And so that's part of the challenge, is that we need to do things differently. We need to stop preparing for the future that we expect, and we need to create the future that we want. The things we do tomorrow to get to our best future are fundamentally different than the things we do tomorrow to prepare for the worst, to de-risk the future. We need to embrace it. We need to invite others to embrace the future. So for most of us, we think about the future, we stop thinking about it in 2050, because that seems like a long time from now. But 2050, that's 25 years. That's the same as the year 2000, which is yesterday for some of us. So why does now matter? Well, it matters for a lot of reasons. After 2050, population growth slows dramatically, and it's actually declining by the end of this century. Every day between now and 2050, it gets harder to feed the world. But every day after 2050, it will get easier to feed the world if we haven't screwed things up. If we haven't cut down our forests and drained our rivers, our lakes, and our aquifers, in many ways, we will be good forever. All of the productivity gains after 2050 go to reducing the footprint of agriculture. Everything will get easier. But it requires us to get there without having screwed things up. So, as was earlier mentioned, the next 25 years are not just the most important 25 years in the 10,000-year history of agriculture, and they are. They're also the most important 25 years there will ever be in the history of agriculture. And that's why we need to get it right. But in order to do that, we need the public, and we need governments, and we need industry working together. And that's why we need a new narrative for agriculture, one that asks people to embrace the future, not to fear it. Because if we do that, I guarantee you that agriculture will save the planet. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Jack. Mensajes fuertes. La presentación.
Thank you, Jack. As Manuel said in his intro, the discussion on this new narrative invites us to think about the design of public policies, that is, as a new how a new narrative on farming should be like the groundwork for the design of public policies that reinforce competitiveness for the sector. So we would like to invite Kip to his reflections and to think on the strategic role of public policies with the leadership of the private sector as well.
Good morning. It's a pleasure again to be here at APRISEET Congress, and I want to say welcome to the Ministers of Agriculture that are here, the many organizations that represent agriculture across Argentina and the Americas, and a special thanks to Director General Otero for inviting me to attend this event and share a few words here today. Your leadership at IICA is present across the Americas as I watch your activities, so thank you for allowing me to join you. Well, it is with deep pride and conviction that I stand before you today at the APRISEET Congress, an emblem of innovation, stewardship, and the enduring spirit of Argentine agriculture. Today I want to speak about the truth we must all embrace. Food security is national security. In a world increasingly shaped by uncertainty, geopolitical tension, climate shocks, economic volatility, there is one truth that remains constant. Agriculture is not just an industry, it's the foundation of sovereignty, the engine of stability, and the heartbeat of democracy. We cannot speak of peace, prosperity, or sovereignty without first securing the foundation of any nation, agriculture and food. Food security is not a peripheral concern, it's a central pillar to our national strength. And it begins beneath our feet in the soil. And I know that's what APRISEED is all about. As all of you that are APRISEED members know, healthy soils is a silent engine of every thriving democracy. It is the heartbeat of farms and the nations alike. When our soils are resilient, our economies grow stronger, our citizens are nourished, and our democracies flourish, protected by free enterprises and stable institutions. So what is the link between agriculture and national security? A nation that cannot feed itself cannot defend itself. Food security is on the front line of sovereignty. Without control over our food systems, we risk economic instability and civil unrest and geopolitical vulnerability. Every crop harvested and every herd raised is a shield against foreign dependence. Domestic agriculture reduces exposure to global disruptions, economic coercion, and hostile trade tactics. Nations that treat agriculture as a tool for stability will lead through crisis, not follow. Weak soils equal weak states. Soil health is not just an environmental, it's foundational to sustainable power and global influence. In times of war and peace, food is leverage. The ability to feed allies and citizens transform agriculture's capacity into geopolitical strength. Let me visualize this further. One thing that we learned a lot in my preparation, as I have said before, I had a unique lens on agriculture and food systems and food security as national security. Being a farmer for 50 years and then serving as the U.S. ambassador to the Rome-based food and ag agencies and seeing what it's like politically and for those that are in loss of access to food around the world as I traveled across Africa. But we knew there was 4 pillars that a nation is predicated upon, 4 elements that supported that nation's strength. Number 1 was diplomacy. It was the ability for people to be placed around the world to be able to make sure don't get into any kind of crisis with the country, at the same time leveraging opportunities in those nations. Next was informational. Have the best in informational resources to know what's going on around the world so you can make good choices. Third was to have a strong military. Always hoping you don't have to use it, but have a strong military. And finally, economic. But I'll get to one more that I'll share with you later. But when you look at this map, you can soon see where there's nations across the world that are food insecure. And they oftentimes don't have the rule of law. They have people migrating around. They get involved in terrorist activities. They get involved in human trafficking. They get involved in illicit drugs and arm movement. But the worst case is they're hungry. As Jack shared, nearly 800 million people, and sometimes upwards of 1 billion people, are hungry around the world at any one time. That breeds disparity and more people move around and we get involved in these other activities. But at the same time, when you look at this map, this is where I see the opportunity for the Americas. For countries like Argentina, the United States, and others that want to be a part of the solution of feeding that global population. I can't say that I believe things are going to change anytime soon in Africa. And you look at that map, that's where a lot of the population lies, and that's where a lot of the hunger is as well. We need to do our part in the Americas to make sure we can play our role in feeding people around the world. We know that food security is national security, as I said many times, and it's played out over time. We had the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and then just not too long ago, 15 years ago, we had Arab Spring. This all shows that it can happen again. And even in the United States, I go back to 1928, when my father was born. Our country was food insecure in the United States. We had people starving. We didn't have the system we have today to make sure food had the ability to move around the country. We didn't have cold supply chains. That was the generation my father grew up in, and we've evolved over time. As Jack mentioned, we can't always look at the past to predict the future, but at the same time, we need to understand that we can listen to each other and how we can feed people. Vladimir Lenin once said this: every society is only 3 meals from chaos. Think about what it would be like in your household or in your community or in your city or in your nation if you went 3 meals without food. not knowing where the next one is going to come the next day. This is why food security is national security. National power enables a nation to maintain that national security, as I talked about in those 4 pillars I spoke of earlier. But we've taken food for granted so oftentimes. You know, a lot of times, you know, in the United States, we spend about 11% of our disposable income on food. But if you're in a foreign nation, and you're in Africa as an example, some nations are spending 80-90% of their income on food. You can't take it for granted, and we shouldn't either. But we're going to find out the consequences of that in time. So when we look at what makes us vulnerable, we've assessed this, we've done some deep dives on this. We look at supply chains. We look at the vulnerability with our digital supply chains and the way we move food and all the ingredients around the world to make the product that ends up going to the consumer. We look at regulatory. We know that the regulatory process, especially in the United States, has really slowed down in approving new products that we can use on our farms today. What used to take 6-7 years is now 15 years to get a new product to the marketplace. That continues to be a burden for us to innovate and to bring new ability to feed and expand what Jack showed in his map of how we can produce more with less on the acres we have. We have legal challenges. We tend to live in a country that has lawfare occurring where people are suing for everything they can to try to come after sometimes the farmer and our suppliers. Labor is an issue. But when we look at global trade, we know that's a challenge as well. But when we look at foreign ownership and dependence, this is where I see the biggest challenge is oftentimes nations like the United States, maybe Argentina and some others, we've put our short-term prosperity ahead of our long-term security. It's that long-term security that gives us the ability to make sure we're a strong nation. But oftentimes we are coerced into taking that short-term deal with somebody to buy a product at lower cost because of lower labor costs or subsidies or something that allows them to sell us to that at a lower cost, but at the same time makes us vulnerable to them. And I think about that. I think about, and I'm saying this publicly a lot, our Chinese supply chains. Nearly 70% of the chemistries we use in the United States to protect our crops against insects, diseases, and weeds comes from China. What happens if a war breaks out between Taiwan and China? What's our access to products then? What does our productivity do? Are we vulnerable? Is Argentina vulnerable? We all need to assume that risk and say what will happen if that occurs. And finally, policy. This is something that I challenge every audience I get in front of. We always lean on organizations like APRISEED in the United States, National Corn Growers, Soybean Growers, Cotton Growers, and all those groups to do our advocacy in Washington, D.C. But I look to you at APRISEED. I look at your members. Get involved in the process. Talk to your legislators. Make sure they hear your voice. Your voice is strong and needs to be heard. So it's a simple equation for the fourth revolution in agriculture. We need to increase food production and efficiency, and this goes for Argentina, the United States, or anywhere in the Americas. We need to reduce that dependency on foreign supply chains, especially those with our adversaries. You know, I look at a lot of our nitrogen fertilizer still comes from Russia today. What happens if that gets sanctioned here soon? What happens if they cut off that supply? Think about if you try to produce a corn crop without nitrogen. Increased dependency on our outputs. Make sure that the rest of the world needs our outputs. Make sure we're providing an excess so we can meet that need. That will give the country like Argentina food power. Next, the food power center of gravity, and this is a very busy chart, but nonetheless, hopefully it's available to you afterwards, you can have this, but this talks about the different mechanisms that need to work together to make sure a nation, its agriculture industry, has the ability to feed itself and to provide that economic opportunity to be a strong industry within their own country because of the exports or the value-add opportunities they can bring to themselves. You can see there's a long list from geopolitics to ag revolutions to consumers, land ownership. All this is interconnected, and we need to make sure we're focused on those issues. So food power is food security, and it's our national security. The Americas must establish a national security view of the agri-food value chain. And as I said earlier, when you look at that map of the world and you saw where the hungry people were at, the need for food was, as I said in Costa Rica just 2 weeks ago, this is the opportunity for the Western Hemisphere to play a role, to create those economic opportunities right here at home. So here's the call to action. And you can see this, and you can leave that up there while I finish my few comments here, because I know we're short on time. In conclusion, farmers must guide their own destiny, not some distant global bureaucracy. We're not just producers. We are the guardians of the land, defenders of freedom, and the architects of the future. It is not an international organization like the UN, however well-intentioned, that should chart our course. It is institutions like APRICED or IICA that truly support farmers across the Americas. From the pampas of Argentina to the heartland of America, farmers hold the reins of our destiny. So now is the time to strengthen the Western Hemisphere through agriculture, as I said earlier. Under President Milei of Argentina, he has entered a bold new era for the country of Argentina, and under President Donald Trump, the U.S. has committed to a renaissance in agriculture to deliver global food power. So let's combine our forces. Now more than ever, our two democracies must forge a strategic alliance, uniting the Americas through shared values and cooperation amongst producers, policymakers, and nations. So here's the call to action. To all producers in Argentina and the United States, the APRICED community is a symbol of what's possible when farmers lead with vision, science, and values. We must continue to innovate, collaborate, and push forward because food security is freedom, and sustainability is not the enemy of progress, it is the compass. Let us take the future into our own hands. Let this be our moment in the Americas. Our future must not be dictated by distant bureaucracies or outdated policies domestically, but claimed by farmers who refuse to be overlooked. Food is freedom, soil is power, agriculture is our legacy. We must not just feed the world, we're shaping it. So let's rise together, dig deep, and show the world what real sustainability looks like when it's led by those who live it every day. The future isn't waiting, we're planting it. Let us take the future in our own hands in the Americas, Argentina and the United States. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Kip.
Thank you, Kip. Now we're going to give the floor to Walter, who has been part of the group of experts who have reflected on the construction of this new narrative, which is precisely one of the most authorized voices to think from a perspective, strategic point of view, committed to sustainability. So let's hear Walter. Thank you very much for the invitation. You will hear some things that you have heard before. I'll try to be more pragmatical, perhaps. I'll try to connect this to more specific options. The first question we should be asking ourselves is why these people are talking about a new narrative. Why do we need a new narrative? There are a number of philosophical ways to answer this. I'm going to give you the most pragmatic answer. Today, global environmental agenda is not defined globally, but by the European Union, whether we like it or not. Why? Because when you leave empty spaces, those are taken up by other players. Those empty spaces have been taken up by the European Europe in their full right, but it's necessary to define the global agenda by us all. But that needs effective action from a political and diplomatic standpoint and sound science evidence. In these two senses, I'm excited about the IICA's participation in this type of activities because they have a key role, and I hope we have time to talk further about this. What is going on today? There are two things that are important. World population is more and more urban, more metropolitan, and that makes the common citizen further from production centers. And one of the things that happened in the younger generations is that they become very permeable to messages that go against production. We see some things when we talk about the agreement between European Union and Mercosur. This type of signs. The producers that are defending their own interests, but we see environmentalists connecting agricultural production to toxic things. But this is at a more political, social level. But there's also a community, a European community that is sound and scientific that produces papers like these, produced by first-level institution. And what they see is that Mercosur does not pass the test on sustainability. The food production does not pass the sustainability test, inclusion, transparency, and regulation application. This requires our community, our scientific community, to respond to this paper, with evidence, with scientific evidence, with rigorousness, but we have to ensure that the scientific community can take care of these things. The panel, the topics that we suggested in this panel had three main pillars: food security, regeneration and conservation of soils, preservation of biodiversity, and fight against climate change. I'm going to talk about three of them. Let's talk about food security. Why does Latin America is so important in the global food security? That has already been mentioned. In the trade balance of food, you can see the big difference Latin America and Caribbean makes with the rest of the world. It's clearly those that have exports the biggest trade balance in the world, and we expect for this to continue growing at about 26% in the next 3 years. Why does that happen? How does Latin America achieve this? It's very much related to the richness of natural resources. If we see that the total area taken up by Latin America in the world is more or less 10% of the rest of the world, that 10% has more than 20% of forest, more than 50% of primary forest, an enormous amount of vegetable species, mammals, more than 30% of the whole precipitation in the world, and more than 30% of renewable water. That's the secret of Latin America. As Jack said, this is what we have to be guardian of, the guardians of these natural resources. So the big challenge for Latin America in the present and the future is to use these natural resources in a sustainable manner and to show it and to communicate that we are using it sustainably. How do we go about this? There's a very scientific paper that communicates this very simply. They define biophysical boundaries, how much we can use of water, how much we can affect the quality of water, how many GHG gases, what is the ecological footprint, what the amount of phosphorus, the biophysical limit we should not surpass, and then the social conditions we want to achieve. Life expectancy, health access, education, etc. And then the research, the challenge is how do we get the social conditions that are adequate enough without surpassing those boundaries? What has been going on in the world today? This graph shows how we achieve those social conditions and how we overcome or surpass those biophysical boundaries. The countries in the world that achieve important advances from a social point of view have achieved that on the basis of going beyond that biophysical boundaries. What about Latin America? It's the same as the rest of the world. Latin American countries with good social achievements are challenged in the terms of biophysical boundaries. So the first thing, two important challenges for us in the region are, one, the indicators that are being used are the adequate ones for Latin America, are the best indicators for Latin America. And number two, how do we achieve transition to take up that A space, the space where we achieve social conditions without surpassing the biophysical limits? And that is already happening. That is already being demanded from consumers. This is a snapshot, yes, of ground beef, and they are already using indicators of carbon footprint, but also amount of water and quality of water, how much water was used to produce that beef, the use of land, agrochemicals. And tomorrow we are going to see the impact on biodiversity, soils, animal well-being, social impact. This is something that is already happening. This is also being demanded from consumers. How are we positioned in the region? Good question. First and foremost, as previous speakers have mentioned, we are a very heterogeneous population, but we need to measure this with robust and practical indicators at producer level. If we have time in the discussion, we can talk about important advances that have been going on. The second point, the second pillar of discussion has to do with soils. I'm not going to tell you in APRESID the importance of taking care of the soils. This is the engine of APRESID. But you might have a certain carbon stock on the soil, and we start applying different production methods. The first thing that can happen is the loss of carbon in the soil. When at a certain point of this process, we implement technologies such as direct seeding, cover crops, good grazing crops, well, that increases the carbon stock in the soil. And this is called carbon sequestration, which is removal of carbon from the atmosphere. And that carbon sequestration has generated the existence of a carbon market, opportunities for producers to receive money for the cleaning of the atmosphere. This is very interesting and very positive. Here, the challenge is measuring these things well. The worst that could happen to the agricultural community is to start selling things that are not robust enough, to start having stamps that are not very reliable or that are not verifiable. The importance is to measure these indicators well. Now, why is this important in the world? Once again, APRESID knows about this, but if you do a sketch of the carbon balance in the world, you see here the carbon emissions per fossil fuel burning, deforestation, how much is captured by the vegetation and the oceans, and that 5.2 is the net amount of carbon per year in the world. Now, if you compare that amount to the 860 gigatons of carbon in soils, there is an initiative called 4 per 1,000 that says if we achieve to increase an amount of carbon in the soil in 0.4%, we would be compensating almost 70% of the annual carbon emissions. This is the relevance carbon has, and this is the narrative we should convey. Why APRESID exists? Why is it important to achieve carbon balance? Why is it important? Why carbon sequestration is important? And this is temporary. You know that soil will continue sequestering carbon until it reaches a new balance. But this buys us time for the decarbonization of economy. It's very valuable time that we are buying. And the other thing that is key for APRESID is, as I was saying, carbon sequestration, how much it means keeping the carbon that is already there. How much are those 860 gigatons of carbon in the soil worth? We place a lot of value on the conservation of the Amazonia tree. How much is the soil? If I do not keep the carbon in soil, in APRESID or in organizations such as APRESID, we need to carry that forward. And the last thing, climate change. The problem of climate change is the emission of greenhouse gases, period. That has increased a lot, and that generates global warming, affecting the climate. So the fight against climate change is simply the fight to reduce net GHG gases. Where do these gases come from today? It's very complicated, but summarizing, it comes from here. Almost 75% of greenhouse gases come from fossil fuels. All the rest is about 17%. If we are really interested in climate change, let's not get distracted. The first problem we have is fossil fuels. 3/4 of gases come from the fossil fuel energy. The question is, as a food system, from the farm to the plate, the transportation, retail, sales, etc., how much do we contribute to those greenhouse gases? These are all the percentages of the global total. 9% of global emissions come from the use of energy to process and the retail food sector. 1% transportation, 2% in production. How much comes from livestock? 6% from livestock and manure, 4% from soil, fertilizer, and 2% in wetland conversion. Deforestation, 3%, and of the total emission, about 2% from food waste. As producers, we should ask, how much is in the phase of production? And these are the numbers. The next question is, what can be done? Is there anything we can do to reduce that? Being aware, and let me insist, being aware that 74% come from fossil fuels. To give you an idea of the relation, of comparative relation, that 6% from livestock and manure is more or less the same or a bit less than what is lost in the fossil fuel sector due to methane leaks, not for producing natural gas, but leakage. This is for you to compare the contribution of the food sector in the greenhouse emissions. In livestock sector, we can do grazing management and to start asking the baseline of the pampas. What is the natural state? Is it 0 methane emission. In the Pampas, about 8 million we've had animals part of the natural grazing for 8 million years. The baseline then is not zero. Second, this carbon, methane, is new carbon that we are injecting into the atmosphere? No, we are recycling it. Methane that is in the grass, it's eaten by the cow, photosynthesis. Well, it's part of a cycle. We are not injecting new carbon. Methane remains in the air for 15 years. Carbon dioxide remains for 1,000 years. The warming power is well measured. This is matter to be discussed. In the case of fertilizers, there's a great hope for new fertilizers based on renewable energies. To generate urea is very costly from the energy point of view. If we use that energy, we use it from renewable resources, it's a great potential to lower carbon footprint. And of course, the new fertilizing management. And there are things that have to be eliminated. They are not sustainable. Deforestation, for example. And it's not a question of a consumer request. It's not sustainable from the social, economic, environmental point of view. Some final remarks now. First, we need a new narrative for our food system, and that requires political, diplomatic actions and robust scientific evidence. In the case of global food security, Latin America and the Caribbean is a key region. One thing is to ensure that to increase the proportion of food production, sustainable food production. Today, what's going on, as I'm showing, is that when we improve the social conditions, we sacrifice biophysical boundaries. We have to look for the way to revert that, to continue reaching those social goals that have improved so much, but trying to avoid surpassing those physical boundaries. Once again, I'm not going to talk about the importance of soils to you, but I wanted to continue thinking how we can value more, not only the sequestration, carbon sequestration, but the conservation, which is what no-tillage does, crop rotation and the use of cover crops. Even if you are not sequestering, it's part of a good situation, how much it costs to continue keeping all that system. If we care about climate change, let's not forget about this. 75% of emissions come from fossil fuels. All the rest is 25%. And there is a good potential, an interesting potential we should explore in the reduction of emission coming from to those 25 to 30% of total emission that comes from the total food system, from the production to the table. Thank you so much. Thank you, Walter.
Bueno, vamos a escuchar.
So now we will listen to our very last speaker. This is the opposite Congress. And of course, we need to hear the voice of our farmers. We need to know their reflections from the perspective of farmers as part of this discussion on the new narrative. Okay, thank you everyone for showing up at this Congress. We are so happy. This is a deluxe panel that we are having today, and thank you for giving room to our institution and to the farmer's voice. Actually, I would really love to provide the perspective of the farmer. I think that we are being faced with a very challenging context, which can help us recalculate, rethink what we are doing. We have very low profitability. It's almost non-existent for some crops and for some activities in general. We have a need for scale, growing industry requires a growing scale so as to cater to production demands. We have an erratic climate, like extreme droughts, floods, high temperatures. As well, climate change offers us an opportunity to promote sustainable systems if the indicators are good. But we are also under threat because, as was said here, society is targeting agriculture as part of the problem and not the solution. Within this challenging context, there is a growing lack of interest on the side of youngsters with regard to agriculture. Few youngsters want to become farmers. And there is a growing tension between the countryside and cities. The intention is to drive agriculture farther and farther away. The farther agriculture is practiced from the cities, so much the better. That is what people say. And that contributes to creating this knowledge gap between food that is consumed and where that food comes from. So we need to see this challenge as a possibility, an opportunity for improvement. Recurring crises, such as COVID, the black swans, as is mentioned by one expert, those are the engines of innovation. Those are the ones that ask us or that push us to think again. Undoubtedly, this obligates us, this forces us to rethink our situation. Quoting Taylor as well, the sector needs to be anti-fragile. That is to say, it needs to get better after stress. It's like the immune system, like are the bones in our body. Because of the stress produced by gravity, our bones become stronger and stronger. So the food community, in short, needs to come out of this experience stronger. For that, it is necessary to create interactive innovation models where the farmer needs to be the protagonist of changes. A farmer that is angry, a farmer that turns his shoulder on new technologies, that clings to what he has been doing for ages without understanding that the world is changing, is a farmer that is under threat. As with all populations, we have growers that are more amenable to exchange, who are early technology adopters, who like to network. Argentina is a bit like that. Same thing, of course, especially for Abrasit, and that is because we have been bred by necessity. We have had to bring science into our farms. We have been forced to work out different problems, like, for example, soil erosion, the soil erosion that was taking place in the central areas of the country because of the slopes, because of rainfall and so on. And we had to begin to engage in no-till, and we didn't know how to do that at the beginning. We didn't have the knowledge, we didn't have the machinery, but we refused to remain isolated. We went ahead and asked scientists to help us out, as well as machinery manufacturers, so as to adapt our machineries to different environments, soils, fallow or stubble, and so on. So same thing with soil resistant, with glyphosate resistant soil, and so on. So there were now people think differently, like, for example, how having cows near soybean fields. To control weeds, instead of continuing to apply herbicides or herbicide mix, which generates more resistance, of course, we continue to use the herbicides, but we need to try to control the weeds from a systemic standpoint. We need to keep our fields alive and green for as long as possible. So same thing for legumes. We can fix nitrogen and capture more carbon, and that kind of farming, which uses integrated systems, like we can do pastures as well, that agriculture, that farming is the one that has the best environmental signature, so to speak, a reduced water footprint, a reduced carbon footprint, a reduced impact of agrochemicals in our environment because we pay attention to the ecology and the interaction between the living organisms in the system. But this interactive model, which spoke to the tiller, manufacturer, the researcher, or the farmer, right now we need to include society at large. We need to include consumers. And how? Through the agri-food industry. So the consumers need to be brought into this network. And this is more complex because the network becomes more complex itself. New technologies, they are overwhelming. And we know that. Let's take a classic example of AI. AI against man. Well, I think in no likelihood the problem will be humans should know how to use AI to make better decisions and make progress vis-a-vis the ancient farmers or old-fashioned farmers that turned their backs on technology and that want to cling to the past. The real gap, the real difficulty that we will have is not AI against humans, at least not in the short term. It is the humans that use AI vis-a-vis versus the person that does not want to use this technology, that doesn't want anything to do with it. So I think growers need to get involved in innovation processes. There will be no one throwing a line at you. You need to go out and find the help of science and new technologies, and that applies to decision makers. It is important to have top quality public policies, and we need to have also top quality private-public collaboration. With regard to European subsidies, those models create fragility in a way, and then they create extreme fear of an open world. When a grower is subjected to the stress of growing demand on the side of society, technologies, and how to bring youngsters in so that younger people may collaborate, because, of course, the drivers, the strength that is provided by youngsters is entailed by technology, sustainability. Farming that does not speak of sustainability of technology is farming that will soon find its demise. So I'm coming back to the farmers that cling to the past. Of course, I know that the empirical knowledge of farmers is excellent. That is a huge value, but we need to know how to leverage it through our work with science and technology. And coming back to what the experience that we had, networking is so important. There are farmers that are early adopters, others that are not so much of that, but there is nothing more effective than for a farmer than to see that another farmer did well, and that is the way of bringing things to scale faster. That is why it's so important that farmers make their voices heard. That is why it's so important to get the agribusiness involved. And how will we decode this? Because I may have a lower carbon footprint or a better water footprint and so on. But we need to decode this for farmers. We need to say to them, okay, this product takes care of the environment in an easy-to-understand language. We have an opportunity. Before COVID and before the Russia-Ukraine war, people believed that organic agriculture was the solution. Because we became aware of the fragility of supply and demand of food and energy after the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we became aware that to sustain this growing demand, technology had to be used. Productivity had to be in the picture. But what we see nowadays in different conferences is that these attributes that, well, like for example, no-till is becoming a more and more valuable tool for producing foods with less environmental impact. Maybe that is in the head of political decision makers or academia, but European farmers feel threatened and they decide to demonstrate, and there is unrest, and that is because farmers are not involved in innovation processes. So we cannot teach anybody any lessons. I do not think we can say to farmers elsewhere in the world how they should do their farming. European farmers are overwhelmed by the rules that they have to obey. The rules govern their lives. Like, for example, do they need to do 4-species farmers so as to get their subsidy? In some cases, they are allowed to do no-till, but no glyphosate is allowed, and so on. So this is a very difficult web of rules that they need to obey. And the only profitability that they can look forward to is getting the subsidy. So it's a very difficult situation for farmers. They are between a rock and a hard place many times. So this compels us to think about this new narrative. And in these interactive models, there needs to be people that know how to be good communicators. We need to open up our source. That is why open source is the title of this edition. And we need to be able to show what we do and how we do it. And we also need to build together a new narrative. That is what open source is. It's about showing the way, not just the results. The way is riddled with errors in this time of social media, where everyone shows Instagram reels where they look so happy and they look so perfect and they look so well dressed and so well. Not always everything turns out so nicely, and the road is filled with errors and mistakes that we should not repeat. Because that is the most important source of learning for humanity, is trial and error. So if we open up our code, if we speak the same language, if we have indicators that are agreed on, and if we build bigger and bigger collaborative networks, that will be a huge opportunity for agriculture. Not to speak of the Americas, where we have a potential for food production, which was shown by the previous speakers. And we can also produce bioenergy, biofuels. As was said today, over 74% of emissions are caused by fossil fuels. So there's a world that will demand new fuels. Now, for example, for aviation, 2 to 5%, 70% for 2050 of the fuels need to be biofuels for aviation. And there will be synthesis fuel as well involved, like with green hydrogen or biogenic CO2. So there's a fascinating world that is barging in, and where agriculture can play a role. But we need to step out of our isolation. The farmer that stays in his farm, clinging to his tradition, not connecting with science or technology, not even with other farmers, that's a farmer that condemns himself or herself to a dire future. We need to contact farmers that are early adopters, that are willing to network. All of those farmers will later on ride the crest of the wave of innovation. So a wonderful future awaits farming, but we need to leverage this crisis so as to reflect on things and generate these interactive spaces. Again, thank you. Before we close this panel, time is running out for us, so I will try to summarize some of the issues that were mentioned. Thank you for your interventions and your presentations. First of all, this invitation to rethink the new narrative of the region is not something philosophical. It is pragmatic. As a matter of fact, it is defined as part of the decisions made by farmers, regulators, legislators. The perception on the role of agriculture in the economy, society, etc., that is not a philosophical thing, but rather it's a pragmatic factor. In addition, the current narrative is that agriculture is a problem that needs to be solved. And the invitation right here has to do with thinking about agriculture as a solution. Manuel said that agriculture is part of an integrated system that does not only provide food, but also solutions for other sectors, for nutrition, health, energy. All of this helps us to think about agriculture as a solution, not just because of the importance in the supply of foods, something that Jack mentioned in connection with the significance of the coming 25 years, not just because of what that means in terms of our history and the 10,000 years that humans have been practicing agriculture, but also because of the impact that this will produce moving forward. And also, where are we headed? Things are not we are not doing badly, we are doing well, but we need to jumpstart these processes and these transformations. And in this regard, farmers have a fundamental role to play as central actors in the processes involving technology adoption, and how important it is to have science accompany us. So having said this, we will close this panel. Manuel, would you like to share some final reflections? I would just like to say that the time for change has not arrived just yet. We need to accelerate transition. We need to act pragmatically. We need to work with all of the players in the ecosystem of agri-food systems. We need to understand that this is a collective construction, and we need to try and understand the psychology of consumers. That is the only way in which we can build this new narrative. And we should also emphasize that we need to look forward rather than backwards. We need to know where we are coming from, but we need to clearly understand the challenges that await us. Thank you. Marcelo, do we have any closing comments? Yes, we can hear him. Yeah, well, we need to take a perspective of the region and the Americas. We need to take a perspective on agriculture globally. This is obvious, and everyone said that. If we just focused on the attributes of Argentina, no-till, 80% worth of adoption by farmers, and if we stayed with this agenda and the world, suppose the world is talking about something else entirely, we would not be doing things well. So we are working with Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Argentina. So at least we are getting started with working with our neighboring countries. So what happens with carbon dynamics? What happens with soil when it is tilled, when it is not tilled? So what happens with a tilled system? What happens with no-till systems? So we are starting to work with data, with information, and regionally this is important because farmers should get connected, should network, not just inside the country domestically, but elsewhere in the world. As someone said last year, there was the speaker from Tennessee who came over and he said that I think that we need to work here because we have the same challenges and we need to address the problem. If the problem is the problem is related with the biome, how do we guarantee biodiversity? How do we design our landscape? And what will be our soil dynamics, our environment dynamics, and how do we need to transform it? But once again, I would like to reiterate this call to networking, and also I would like to reiterate the significance of farmers in the region in general. In our case, our direct neighbors, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. I can see that Fernando is in the audience. He's a close friend of mine. So we need to work together, and we need to work continentally and globally. Okay, thank you. So this marks the end of this panel. I would like to express our gratitude to the speakers as well as the audience. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you. So this marks the end of this initial discussion. Anyway, we would like to say bid our farewell to Mylan, Manuel, Jack, Marcelo. Manuel, please stay over a little bit more on the stage, and we will now invite Nicolas Bronzovic. He is the chairman of INTA and Fontagro.
We invite them to the stage to receive an award
Fontagro and APRESID express their recognition to Mr. Manuel Otero on account of his commitment with the sustainable development of farming in the Americas and his ongoing encouragement of innovation, dialogue, and regional integration. That is one of the texts that appears on this plaque, and also the steering council of Fontagro recognizes Manuel Otero through his chairman Nicolas Bronzovic. They would like to express their gratitude for his efforts in developing agri-food systems in Latin America and the Caribbean. His support to Fontagro has been key when it comes to encouraging initiatives that promote innovation and sustainability in the sector. His leadership and his hard work have left an indelible mark on our mission. Thank you so much to all of you. All those that made themselves present, thank you to those that shared this initial presentation in the Spraytech Auditorium, the future of Latin America and the Caribbean, building a new narrative for agriculture. In just a few minutes, we will have the opening ceremony for our Congress. So we would like to thank you all for your presence here today, and we will reconvene in 10 minutes. Thank you. So he's going to say a few words.
A very brief. Good morning, everyone. Manuel. It is truly a pleasure to award you for your career in IICA, and I have no doubt that you have collaborated to build and empower the network of the global farming sector that is so important. So on behalf of Fontagro on this occasion, it's a pleasure for me to have the honor to give you this distinction. Thank you very much. I'm sure we will continue meeting one another in different panels. On behalf of APRESID, we really appreciate you, Manuel. It's a great source of pride also because you are Argentine. So it's a double source of pride, but your administration has been amazing. We see in IICA a partner, an amazing partner of great value. And this is a sample, your contribution to this Congress with the speakers you have invited and many joint actions. I think IICA is a bridge that is efficient, modern, and necessary to connect the public and private sector to the producer and policies. The IICA is made up of all the agricultural ministries of the region, and you have always provided interactive spaces. I've had the privilege of attending meetings in San Jose and see the economists and the level of professionals that we see here, Eugenio and so many others. We have shared a different standpoint, the richness of science, economy, technologies. I mean, we are part of that invitation. We show the importance of soil with contribution of Bayer, Lego, and different technologies, different tools to showcase this. You are always putting science and technology in each of your interventions and actions. And it's the role of IICA to coordinate a complex agenda, because America is very different. The Americas are very different. Central America, the Caribbean, North America, South America, and bigger countries, different producers, smallholders. So it's very complex, and you do it very well. And once again, by generating these spaces, calling upon the science, technology, and an invitation to think together. Wonderful administration. Thank you so much. I would like to I'd like to take this not only as an individual recognition, but as a collective construction. The IICA has to be an open institution, building more and more strategic alliances with the private sector, as Marcelo very well mentioned, working in a teamwork with innovation, with science. Thank you, Apresit. Thank you, Fundaro. And we'll go. And since I have 5 more months to finish my administration, we will deepen the technical cooperation and to continue working further with the cooperation of all countries. Thank you.